is a little bit some of the newer things I've been thinking about, but try to unpack it through some of the work that I've been doing for the past couple of years. I would talk about dreams a little bit, dreams about data, like les rêves. And so I'm going to go through very slowly a thought experiment of mine in many steps. The first, we assume that the brain has a finite capacity for memory. Memory being, first, what we see, hear, touch, feel, like sensation, input. And so how do we make sense of the things we see and hear? This is me now, kind of video. And it's an experiment I made to try to capture this, but also capture a little bit of the past and think about it with the analogy of zoom. So I have a zoom icon here, and when I start to zoom out, in addition to the image getting smaller and zooming out in space, it also zooms out in time. So you can see this kind of thing. Maybe I can turn it around very carefully so you can see yourself here at the bottom. I'm very interested in time and how we store the past and think about the past, how we make memory. In this case, this video is being stored in a circular buffer, in a sense. So there's 5 minutes that we have access to, and we can zoom in and out of, and after that, it's gone forever. I like the kind of effect with the feedback here. It's nice. Unusual, but so with an infinity of stimulus around us, there isn't enough memory for it all to be stored in full fidelity forever. And so we have to get rid of things. And how do we start processing and making sense? I show a rendering of a project I call Periphery. And this is just, I start with a little bit of just like cell phone footage of a good friend of mine, Prabhas, and this is taken, we're strapping a camera onto this guy's motorcycle helmet in Nepal, and the idea was that we were going to have him drive around and reconstruct a kind of Google Street View kind of thing with motorcycles in the street. And so I started working on some of the math for this transformation, and it didn't completely end up as it did, but I'll show you the same footage gone through this transformation where we have every frame then mapped to where the previous frame was. And this can happen in real time. So we keep playing this video, but keep it tied to the past. I call this like periphery in reference to our perceptual system, in that we have some kind of, we see very little in front of us, but we have a sense of things all around us. And I was trying to do the same with video to make it so that when you're out of the frame, it keeps this edges, and so you have some recollection of the past this way, and some memory. And it reaches this kind of absurd condition where when you keep accumulating this kind of projection of one frame to the other, the error accumulates as well, and you get this kind of incredible contortion. We can do the kind of opposite of this, and instead of distorting the current frame, we can distort the background. And so it's always flat here, but it still kind of stretches out into this impossibility that the medium here, which is this kind of two-dimensional projection, is just simply incapable of properly representing 3D. And it's a kind of fundamental limitation of representing the world with full fidelity. It's just simply impossible. We have to come up with models for it. And I sometimes like to show kind of, as a good example of the impossibility, a video taken from a bus put through the same algorithm, and you see the background moving very slowly, but the foreground moving quickly, and it perturbs into just a flat line because it's just the algorithm is confused. It has nowhere to put the new frames. And so live algorithms, those that operate while a system is in motion, are actually very difficult and finicky compared to offline algorithms, where you have everything. You know what the future will hold, you know the past. If you have all of a video, you can start making more deliberate studies about it. So this is the kind of interface I have for kind of exploring that space a bit. It takes a minute of video at a time and loads it into the kind of main memory of the system. And if you've ever done any video editing, this might look a little familiar as a kind of timeline, where you see a series of thumbnails, in this case once every 5 seconds. There are 12 of them for the full minute that we have. But I'm interested in, how else can we look at this same minute? So when I move the mouse from right to left, I start cropping each of the frames. So by this point here, there's half of a frame every 2.5 seconds. So there are 24 of the frames in all. And I can choose like the left half or the right half, like how we want to slice through this this minute of video and go all the way across to now it's a slit scan. We get a single pixel 1,500 times in the minute, and when someone moves through this pixel, they're frozen into the form again. And this kind of transition is fascinating for me. How it becomes. Maybe we look at the next 60 seconds. And next 60 seconds. I talk about this sometimes because on this end it's this parabola. It's some kind of mathematical shape. At this end, it's a series of images with no clear relationship between one and the next. And there's this point in the middle, maybe, where you can see the icon, you can see the symbolism, you can see that this is a clock, this is a building, but you can also see how it relates to time. And you have a connection between this moment and the environment around it, the part and the whole, if you will. And so I was extending on this, playing with, I have a real interest in video, because I think it's a very rich kind of source of communication. And so I was playing with extending this into a user interface for browsing film. And this was a kind of demonstration I prepared in advance of meeting with a documentary filmmaker who I did some work with that I'll show in a moment. And this is an interface for browsing 15 films by Jean-Luc Godard. And when I move the mouse around, you see these previews in the slit scans like I was showing before. And when I right-click, it changes the kind of mode of like where my mouse was, so you can see the same amount of time with these some different sized thumbnails. And then you can actually hit the left mouse button to start playing back the video within the slit scan. Where this slit scan starts serving as an index into the video. I can click on it to get back to this point. And you can start to understand the way that the dancer's motion carves out like a calligraphy script onto the screen. You can find some other film. Look around a little bit. You get some sense that maybe this has some cars. Hey. I was experimenting in some kind of fire. You learn to pick up some of these cues. I can't see it. Yeah, I was playing with all sorts of things on this interface as well, like some other modes where you can hit like the space bar and it goes into a scatter plot where the every clip in the film is arranged by hue and saturation, and you can move through the films by color or something. And I thought when I did it, it was really cool, but it didn't really go anywhere for me. So it's just yes.
I missed a link here. Is this your work? I mean, like rendering it, or is it possible for anybody who is handy enough with his computer to do it?
Well, I make everything I do open source, so
no,
but all the computer programming is my own.
I mean, I cannot go to the computer and play it a little and come out with this.
Well, I offer my code to anyone who wants it.
Okay. But it's your code.
But yes,
Okay, that's what I wanted.
it's my code, but not my films.
Okay, this is what I wanted to know.
Yes. No, and I'll go into it as because I do this in the hopes of making tools for filmmakers that they can use, and to change the way that people think about film and think about making film. So what this project ended up turning into, it doesn't look so much like this, but you'll see some of the record of where it came from. One up. So this turned into a collaboration with the filmmaker Ea Sivan that we called Montage Interdit, which took the work of Godard and launched a kind of documentary exploration of its of like the politics of Godard, which are somewhat controversial. And so this was a technique of trying to represent a film, the organization of source material as if it were a film. So I can. This is online, by the way, at montageinterdit.net. We zoom out, and we can kind of see that this is the whole thing. This is all the material. It's a kind of work in progress still. Eyal still is still interested in developing it further, maybe even making a linear narrative out of it. But in this case, we have a series of tags. He, his assistant, his editor, they watched every film Godard had ever made, every interview they could find with him. They conducted their own interviews. And they arranged it thematically. So we can start playing somewhere in the archive just by clicking on a tag or clicking on one of these clips. And we have a similar kind of relationship that happens then.
Poursuivi maintenant par les Français démasqués par les Arabes, j'étais doublement foutu.
Oui. Je pense à une histoire arabe. C'est un type qui décroche le téléphone et qui dit allô. On lui répond non, c'est Ali. On le vous a dit? Oui.
Si j'avais payé, il m'aurait de nouveau assommé. Mieux valait accepter le combat.
And you can see these slit scans as before, so you have some way to move around through the clips. There's some context about where this comes from. This came from the film Amour by Jean-Luc Godard, directed in 1967, and we're playing about an hour into it. But what's interesting about this clip is it's been dually labeled, because you have this content that's about multiple themes. So we can click on the other theme, and the video continues playing uninterrupted, but now we are in the context of a new tag about the kind of where Jews come up. And likewise, we can also click on something like the film itself, and then resort the whole archive around its films. So you can see now that we're looking at Comment ça va. I won't spend too much time on this, but it's an interesting way to think about telling a story, or maybe there's also ways to connect a film with the commentary about the film. So I work on this, and I get back, I'll come back to some of these ideas. I always come back to ideas. The interface I showed you first with the timelines, I was asked to show it at a film festival, which was a great honor, but also it was a kind of panic because I had two big problems. The first being that I was using this experimental film by John Smith, The Girl Chewing Gum, which I really liked the way it worked, this black and white film with the characters moving, but I hadn't contacted the filmmaker, I didn't really have rights, and I thought that would never work, and then I said also I was showing you a user interface, we can't really show this at a film festival. So she said that by chance the filmmaker who had made the work I was using was also screening in the same program, so she would be able to get the permission without any problem. So it was just about me to kind of adapt this interface into a film. And what I've done, I'll play a little bit of it. The sound is unfortunately important and missing, and this is set up for a 5.1 surround. But you can see what I've done is I've taken the interface where you still have the same condition where every line is 1 minute, but I have it set up now to kind of play through all at once. So if you watch through the red lines, which is possible if it's big enough, you can just watch the film as it normally is. And in the theater I had the central speaker hooked up to just that one, and the whole thing spatialized. But what I noticed was I figured out a way to kind of make everything move, but still keep a very precise relation with time and space. Like, you know, this is 60 seconds in, a minute 20, and it's the left edge that has the kind of time mapping. So as these things move through space, they also move through time. And you have all sorts of interesting things that start happening, like people who are looping into themselves, like walking endlessly, because they're kind of stuck in time, you know, in a sense. And so what I was, and this is a little bit of a confusing thing to understand. Maybe I spend another minute with it. I think it's kind of interesting. So the left edge of every frame is precisely mapped to time on the space. So this is when something is exactly aligned, like with now. When it was here, it was at 5 minutes exactly, and then so when it's 5 minutes, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and whatnot. But then you know when so it's a way of looping without looping, because when the next frame gets to the same position this one was in, it's back into the same part. Maybe you do, I don't know. Does it make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's enough. But as I started thinking that maybe it's possible for some of these representations to be moving, and for us to be able to think about like a search index or a Kodak as some visual thing, to be able to understand video by searching through a different video that kind of gives you clues into the video you were watching. Yeah, maybe I'll show a little bit of like another sketch for where the state of my work for filmmakers is, and it's it's in terms of the more applied part of my software. This was I like meta projects. I'll show you one that's even more hopelessly meta than this. This is a conference I went to about video called this Video Vortex, and they liked my presentation, so asked if I would do something with the material from the context, from the conference. So this was then a kind of a record of the conference. Then we can zoom out and get a kind of visual overview of the entire conference, and start playing at any point.
And also recording the sexual act on his phone.
We'll see if it works. It's streaming it.
And just like pictures of cute cats and biting babies, videos of sexual acts.
And so you have these kinds of footnotes where they allow hashtags, and then you can start jumping through the video through this kind of textual layer, and start clicking on something like Arab, and all the kind of Arab themes come up, and we can jump to the next talk.
All parts of society, not only educated students and middle class segments. Something it had.
Different moving images. And it's a kind of a stretch for what the web can do, and sometimes you need a fast connection or whatever to really make it work. But it's what I'm happy about with this, even though in some ways it is not as beautiful as Montage Interdit, is that it's precisely the same reason, because this is conference material. It's the most like the kind of rawest, dullest visual stuff, and still it's possible to present it in a way where you can offer these new ways of moving through it, kind of re-engage with the material, and not rely on the fact that anything you do with Godard films will be beautiful, in a sense. To try to really think about making the creation tool and the browsing tool identical. I'll show you maybe with some just junk footage the way that it kind of works, where you can take in something like, this is one of my test databases of it running locally, where you can kind of, the authoring environment is identical to the distribution. So you can be watching something, you say, I need to add a little note here, so you, put a tag and you pick some name like talking, interview, and then you have the clip, and you can make another one.
What must be criticized is that the human race prior to that time and today has not really grappled.
And then you can do the same thing where you start clicking on these, and it's the same software really, but it's I'm interested in a kind of connection between how we make things and how we see them. That you can, as a filmmaker or producer, you can invite the audience into your editing room effectively. You can distribute all of the source material, and you can allow new organizations to happen. You can make film an ongoing process. And you can kind of import a little bit of the open source methodology and open culture into the actual process of filmmaking and communicating through video. Maybe I step back away from the work for another second to more abstract things about. Some came in late, but I was talking about memory and dreams as a kind of theme I've been thinking about recently. Because the idea is you have these inputs, you come in, you see something during the day, and at night you sleep, and maybe this is the time when you process it. You compress maybe your memory while your perceptual inputs are attenuated at night. And if the dream is a representation of memory, it gives us unique insight into the structure of memory. If it were a program, we would call it a codec or something. And it's a structure unlike the ones we use in our computers. Memories are kind of entangled, unstable, they don't stay the same really. So we have this own compression in our heads, but when we usually talk about compression, we're talking about this technical thing, which is the basis and enabling force of networked media. And it tries to be invisible. That's the success of compressing a video, is when you don't notice it was compressed. And I have a study on that I'll show. Turn it down a little bit so you can hear. So this is an image represented digitally as a kind of array of pixel intensity values. And I'm actually just playing this whole image as if it were a sound, and you'll see why in a second. But we see it as this kind of two-dimensional grid of pixels, but on the computer it's represented something maybe a little bit more like this, and this is a kind of showing the frequencies in the image. And you'll see why I call them frequencies when I start removing them. So when I move my mouse left to right, so at this point I've removed the half of the frequencies from the image that are the kind of least visible, and I can snap back to the image, and you see that it's almost completely unchanged, even though half of its frequencies are removed. We keep going with this. Until there's nothing. And in this interface I can also add frequencies individually, like I can add a kind of a low frequency. That's pretty high frequency, maybe this is lower. Yeah, there's a little bit lower, and you can see what this means. The frequency is just a kind of horizontal repetition, and I can add a bunch of them. At this point I've only added what's called the real component of the frequencies, and so there's not a spatial mapping, and all of the kind of typography is a hopeless mess. So I can add a little bit of the phase information. And it's kind of strangely amplified and exaggerated now, but it starts to be visible again, since I've kept the basic proportions between the frequency, it just amplified them. And you can hear the way that's changed, but I'm not expecting that you have a really deep understanding of what you're seeing, because I certainly don't. Though I've tried to really build up an intuition for this Fourier transform and tried to really understand it, but it's, in a sense, when you overcompress digital files, they get kind of strange, blurry in weird ways, this kind of like statistical loss. And I think it's a missed opportunity. Compression is a determination of what information is the most important and a purge of the rest. And I think this kind of way to think about choosing what's important is one of the fundamental problems of the century, is to think about, we have so much all around us that we see, that other people see, and it's just impossible to communicate all of this. We need to have ways to think about what is the most important. I think making a film, a documentary in a sense, is a similar thing, where you have 200 hours of material that you need to cut into 2 hours, and not to mention what you didn't even shoot in the first place. And this is also a kind of compression. And this is maybe why I'm interested in these kind of interface of video editors, the point in between the human and machine compression. Because I try to think of ways that you can make the two come closer together. So for the computer to join in our dream, its codecs need to be rewritten. It needs to learn how to make connections, how to demolish boundaries between files, how to make it so that when something is overcompressed, we understand it more and not less. I have a pretty silly thing I'll show on that theme. Which is this is a series of photographs of me taken by the photographer mathematician Masha Rue, and now they're just kind of scaled down. They're a little bit embarrassing, but I live with it. And I've wired up this website to have a kind of alternative compression algorithm, where when I move the mouse over one of these images, I can recompress the way that these images are scaled down. I can do this to all of them at once if I want to really go a little bit crazy. The way that I've compressed this is by horribly abusing the math from this technique called seam carving. Which was a kind of computer science idea. It came out, there was a well-read paper called Content-Aware Image Resizing a few years back about, again, how to make this kind of invisible compression. This paper was about how to take video or photos or something that you shot on one aspect ratio and change it to a different aspect ratio without anyone noticing, so it would work better on your phone or on this or that. And I've just completely misused it by instead of taking away a little, 10% of the image, taking away 98% of the image, because I realized that this was a kind of use of a determination of which pixels in the image were worth keeping and which ones you could get rid of. And it's based on edges, and which is connected with the way we see things. When there's an edge between, in vision, it means that something is changing. There's the wall, and then there's me. And so this algorithm tries to preserve those edges and just cut away at the wall, effectively, by taking slices through. And there's something kind of humorous or funny about the way this looks, which I think is interesting, and I think it's useful. And it's in the way that it becomes a kind of caricature. And if you laugh, there's some kind of something you understand that you didn't before. You maybe gotten more than you expected out of this medium. And so I think when the compression makes you laugh, it's a sign that you're on the right track with it. In 1950, the pioneer of information theory, Claude Shannon, wrote that the meaning of a message is generally irrelevant. When I read that at first, I took issue with it. Shannon was talking about this thing he called entropy, one of the great misunderstood concepts in history of science. But what he meant by entropy was what a message contained relative to the average message, relative to what you were expecting, relative to this expectation. So Shannon said, information is surprise, which is nice. But to me, I felt like this meaning of the message is irrelevant was masking a kind of, a larger kind of, it was a kind of conservative or reactionary, and that you'd put this kind of baseline of what is normal into file formats and codecs, you know, from the telegram to T9, where certain words are easier to type than other words or whatever. But I started to think about this in a different way, to think that a machine may not be able to comprehend meaning, but it can be programmed to let some pass through. That you could reinterpret Claude Shannon's statement to be that meaning need not be encapsulated within a packet for it to be carried through a medium. That it can survive without being really rigorously organized into a database field or whatnot. And this is a kind of example like this, where the computer isn't really, it doesn't know how funny it is, it doesn't really know anything about who I am or that it's distorted me in this way. There's just something that, since it keeps it as an image and doesn't try to turn it into something else, like a word, it doesn't try to say, you know, male, 26 years old, black clothing, you know, it doesn't try to just turn everything into categories, it just tries to make another image that maybe is helpful for us. So back to the thought experiment, loading memories from dusty neural resources to process them must require kind of staging or working spaces. Maybe regions of the brain that are utilized for perception and immediate recall are used to juggle memories around. But there's a problem with this idea. So the idea, because increasingly our memories are not stored in our heads. They're not captured in our heads, they're stored in our devices, in emails, and photos, on Wikipedia, and video archives. And how will we, so the information we process is, we're now very much connected with these devices in our very thoughts. And with the rise of these, you know, MP3 players, smartphones, spyglasses, Google Glass, everything, there's this kind of thickening metadata layer to our experience of life. We're making history as we live it. We're really, not so much like we're so important, but that we accumulate all of this digital information and publish it and whatever. And I did a project kind of about this last year. It was another video, but I'll play a little bit of it. These self-portraits to give some sense of what I did here. I won't play the whole thing, but what I'm doing here, it starts to see is that I'm live coding a video editor that I'm then feeding in the screencasts of my live coding this video editor. So it's this kind of, you know, Borges style problem where, like map and territory, where it's impossible for me ever to watch all of this stuff. It's just because the process of watching it and sorting it goes back into itself. It's this recursive loop where I try to make this this little thing, and I'm going through these, like, you know, slit scans, and this is very early on. The first thing I did when I was live coding this was trigger the webcam, just to give it a bit of a personal touch, maybe. You know, so it started just very basic with these text areas, but grew out to be a space where I could really organize this material and find little things and make a sequence. And, kind of leafing through how this software develops and gets different things. And yeah, it's very strange in terms of focus also to try to do concentrating work while you're looking at an image of yourself. That's a side note that somehow is also related about consciousness and self-awareness that I think is very relevant today, the kind of level of awareness we have of ourselves from being captured. It's hard to think and to lose track of ourselves and to get into some other kind of space. So maybe a dream is a perception of the recompression process. We're sleeping, we're taking our memories from the day, we're reorganizing them. Using these kind of staging areas in our brain to kind of take something out of our past, since it has this finite capacity, and then reinsert the memories from the day in. And what if a dream was just a way of understanding this process of organizing our memory? And it was kind of an epiphenomenon. The dream was not the purpose of sleep, but rather a kind of almost inadvertent consequence thereof. And in this case, it starts making sense for computers to join in our dreaming, because they too should be reprocessing this information that we give them, to be organizing, making sense of, and making connections between different files, folders, text, video, image. Usually we have our search indices kind of off limits to us. They're black boxes. We type something into Google and get results, but we have no control over the process. And actually, the kind of maybe sad fact is the same is largely true in our own brains. We don't really have access to the internals of our minds, and what we can do with them is limited. Some people try to train themselves to do lucid dreams, where they take control of their dreaming, and this interests me. I mean, can we have a similar agency within computer indices? Can we step into Google and start and have a lucid dream within the search indices of our lives? Connect them with, to be able to browse through freely the past in a kind of associative way, see connections, to be able to think about storage as relative. And so that's what I'm going to be exploring for the next couple of months, is how we can dream with our computers, and how this is connected on a personal level, but also to the question of archives, history, and larger scale problems of the past, and how we make sense of it. So I have a few more things I can show, but I would be interested, since it's a small enough group, in if there's some possibility for a discussion, or if there's something you'd like to hear a little bit more about. If you have any of this kind of idea, you can let me know. Otherwise, I'll show a little bit more work. Yeah?
Just a very quick. What is your target? I mean, is it to create a tool?
Mm-hmm.
Or, well, this is supposed to be an art school, or at least linked with art. Or do you want to create an art piece? Or maybe, at the end, you want to create a machine. I mean, I say it very strongly, a machine that can read my dreams and can transfer them to Big Brother, for that matter. I mean, what is the target of
Yeah,
it's not an easy question, but
it's not an easy question, but I'll start with the end, the idea of Big Brother. It's something I didn't mention so much, but it's a tension in a lot of the work that I'm doing, like especially the video recompression and stuff. If I'm looking for a kind of professional context for this work, the only one I find is that people who monitor surveillance cameras and do research about this, they're the only people who are really doing interesting work with video in this way. And it's a kind of frightening space to work in, because I'm not very interested in this kind of asymmetry of power where some state or some third party knows so much about us that we don't know. So I try to make these tools, I try to think about them, like what could we be doing with this kind of information and insight into our lives. When we use Gmail and Google and whatever, a lot of information about us is transmitted to them, all of the emails, and they've made millions of dollars with this information. So it must be somehow useful or insightful. And the question is just, can we gain from this, or does it only create vulnerability where we're targeted through this information leaking out. In terms of applications of my work, I have to be a little bit strategic because it's just one of me about when I make a prototype in a demonstration and when I really try to make something that other people can use. And I've chosen to think about documentary film as the kind of space where I really want to try to push a tool into the world that can be used and can be useful and can represent a use that is not represented in a different kind of way of telling the truth. They're telling us of creating conditions for honesty, even with film, where you don't have to take so much away and hide something or create this illusion of a linear narrative. So it's something where I think it's useful, but it's a use that people may not have realized they wanted or needed. And in this sense, it gets closer to art and to thinking about some of the bigger questions in art about representation, really at its core, and how new modes of representation, how to represent what is outside, what is in our heads. So I have this relationship with the art world now. I have an art. It's always complicated. Right now I have a kind of art residency, but I'm treated as a scientist there in this context. And but I couldn't pass really, I can't really pass muster as a scientist. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science and I program a lot, but I'm not really, I've lost a little bit of contact with that world. And so I'm a little bit lost with this question. I'd love for it to be useful. I think about use, but I also sometimes the use is very abstract or experimental, and it's maybe in art history, it's maybe I don't mean to say I'm some kind of avant-garde, but that is the gesture in a sense. It's an exploration of what might be possible, and I don't presume that every kind of crazy study I do is somehow useful to a ton of people, but it is the idea is that it's imagining a kind of use.
Well, one question I have related to what you just said is, how do you publish that then? What is the form of?
So I have a lot of code on this just in Git repos, like the video software or something is here, and you get all this code, and if you're a programmer or something, maybe you can take it and do something with it, and then I make this all available under this free software AGPL license, and it's at the same time though there's in terms of not all the code I write is really ready for others to use. It's a different level of difficulty to make code that's easy to distribute, where you can just double-click on it. And so for Interlace, that's the goal in the next months, is to have a installer on the major operating systems that people can double-click and use. And that's how I make it available. I have a sketchbook folder here, where I just, if I have a little script or something and don't know what else to do with it, I'll put it up here. But I don't have a really good strategy for distributing. I do talks sometimes, and that's probably my best way of communicating is being here and just showing it to you. And so there's some talks about it online. But something I'm really working on is trying to get to the level where it's easier to distribute this work and to find a way to do that. So far it's been pretty minimal, turning into gallery shows or something. I had a couple of works in film festivals, but it's mostly when it comes up. I don't do so much active work on this. But, ideas are welcome. I'm really open to ways to.
Yeah, you were talking about a blog once because I have a blog, and you were saying it would be. Yeah. You often thought about doing that, but
the best
never
I've
did.
Gotten is somehow for the last 3 or 4 years, I've just dumped things on in this huge directory that grows and grows and grows, and I can get away with this because I don't try to explain it. Just have things, and you can watch something like This is a good one from last month. Another twist on this girl chewing gum. This is playing at about 12 times speed with the echo of the future in front of it, where you see things before they happen. I work through like a ton of like little experiments and studies and sketches, and I don't usually know where they will go or which ones will be interesting. And that's my biggest problem with publishing is I never really know what things I do is worth putting into the world. And the talks are nice because I have some other thing I want to talk about, and I can think about like what code has resulted. There's an idea in programming that took me a while to come around to, but this idea that code is speech. And it usually comes up when people are talking about like cryptography and programmers get imprisoned for you know, publishing code that allows you to watch a DVD in Linux or something. And so then there are these protests in San Francisco where people have signs like code is speech, and there's this. And it's a questionable line of thinking, but it starts to become personal because there are ideas that I can't express any other way than through code anymore. It becomes a way to think. Yeah.
Last week we had a discussion here in this series with Mr. Hoffman about his art, his art forms, and how he sold them through galleries, which is that you have to put whenever you're the owner of the project or co-owner of the project, the name of the owner appears, and maybe they get paid or whatever. So, what is your reaction when you're presenting something in an art gallery? I suppose that one way or the other you'd like to sell it or to have some money out of it or
yeah, it's actually, I've never shown something in an art gallery that had any sale. It's something I've never encountered yet and would have to negotiate. It's very important to me that I provide access to my work or have that ability to do this, to publish it freely online. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so this is what happened, the discussion last week.
Yeah.
The works were still freely available on
so just the name of the buyer kind of sticks to it.
The buyer would, it would be part of his collection.
Yeah.
It's a conceptual art. You know, you buy the idea, the concept, and then you own the concept. But if everybody else in the world starts drawing the same or same thing, I mean, what have you been thinking of that, or is that still far away?
No, in a sense, that would be great. I want my ideas to be stolen.
Okay, no.
Yeah.
I understand quite well what you say, but maybe sometimes you should eat and drink and
No,
have a family or I don't know.
No, it's something I think about it, how to do this thing of surviving, and it's been an active improvisation for the past few years, little arrangements or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I was in high school and college. I did a lot of work as a journalist, and I'm very sensitive to conflicts of interest, and when incentives get twisted, and to start depending on, like, this work needs to sell for me to live makes me very nervous about what kind of work it would lead to me making. Is it going to kind of compromise does it start changing what I do because I think that something will be easier to sell or not? It's a struggle to kind of figure out these questions, and I've been lucky enough to not have to make some of the hard decisions through getting some, like, this residency or some kind of people who are interested in my research. And sometimes, I mean, what I've done before is I do projects with people and that are paid, but that I think will have some generality, like these film projects. And so the code I make is all open and I can do other things with it, but it's also the needs of the project are very specific, and I can work with filmmakers and how to make this film work. And for me, that's been my favorite model so far, is developing some paid projects in parallel to the software that I want to be writing anyway. And it's also a good test of if it's useful, is if someone wants to really see it happen through the early stages.
Well, obviously